of The Briefing, a co-production of The Appeal and Now This. I'm Jay Willis, senior contributor at The Appeal, and I'm joined tonight by Chris Geidner, the Director of Strategy at the Justice Collaborative and former Supreme Court reporter for BuzzFeed, and Professors Leah Littman and Melissa Murray of Strict Scrutiny, to discuss the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away today at age 87. We are less than 2 months out from an election, and this throws an already contentious and complicated election, to say the least, in even more of a state of turmoil and uncertainty. But before we get to some of the electoral consequences, first I'd like to spend some time discussing Justice Ginsburg, her legacy and her impact not just on the court, but on the development of American law in general. So first, I'll turn to you, Professor Littman. Tell us a little bit about the decades that Justice Ginsburg spent on the court and the legacy she leaves there this evening.
Sure. So when she was appointed to the court, Justice Ginsburg had served in the ACLU Women's Rights Project, and it was really her life's work to ensure that women were equal citizens in the United States. And she continued to do that work while on the Supreme Court. One of her most significant opinions was United States versus Virginia, in which the court invalidated the Virginia Military Institute's exclusion of women from the VMI Military Academy. And then held that Virginia's attempts to create a secondary institution, which was notably worse than VMI, only for women, was unconstitutional as well. Even when she dissented, her opinions had significant impact. Her dissent in the Lilly Ledbetter case, in which the court ruled that under existing law, women could not recover for the entire amount of time in which they were paid less than men, led Congress to amend the statute and change the law as Justice Ginsburg would have interpreted it. Her famous dissent in the Shelby County versus Holder case, in which the court invalidated the crown jewel of the Civil Rights Act, the pre-clearance regime of the Voting Rights Act, led to her nickname, the Notorious RBG. She told the court that they were in saying that the Voting Rights Act had been too effective in solving voting rights discrimination and voter suppression, she told the court that they were throwing away their umbrella because they were not getting wet. And Justice Ginsburg's work on so many facets of civil rights continued until her very last days on the court. Her last opinion for the court, on the court, was a dissent in the court's contraception mandate case, in which the court allowed the Trump administration to give employers a free pass to deny women health insurance coverage for contraception. In dissent, Justice Ginsburg, wrote that the court was casting aside women's rights in a zeal to secure religious rights to the nth degree, and was allowing employers to disadvantage women's equal citizenship. So that was her work on the court and the kind of justice that she was, and the kind of justice that we lost tonight.
Thank you. Professor Murray, I want to turn to you now and sort of ask a similar question as the court's composition and coalition evolved over the years. How did her jurisprudence, her work, how did that sort of guide the court's direction through these different eras? You got to unmute though. There it is.
Sorry about that. Justice Sotomayor problem. She really guided the court and was a stalwart of the liberal wing of the court, especially on issues that related to women. Leah just brought up her dissent in the contraceptive mandate case from last term. I recall her position in oral arguments in that case. That was one of those telephonic oral arguments that we heard toward the end of term. And she took that telephonic argument from her hospital bed where she was receiving treatment. And her position there was quite clear and unequivocal. She couldn't believe that we were back here again talking about the contraceptive mandate, which had been passed by Congress to assure that women's preventative health care would be secured under the ACA. And it had been cleared in previous cases, and she didn't know why we were here again. And she was absolutely unequivocal about that. She was, as an advocate, as fierce as she was as a jurist. She ensured that the 14th Amendment included women. Her advocacy in cases like U.S. versus Frontiero and Weinberger assured that women would be in the Constitution in substance as well as spirit. This is an incalculable loss for the court.
Thanks, Chris. Lastly, I'll turn to you. And I know you wanted to discuss a little bit, not just her legacy as a jurist, but specifically the sort of the personality that she brought to the court and the personal, I guess, the personal impact that she had on that as an institution.
Yeah, I think as Leah and Melissa have said, I mean, the presence that she brought to the court was this personality that she came to the court with, that she had already established, and that she then spent 25 years sort of growing into the legacy that she'd already started to create for herself. And I think there was no time that was more clearly seen than when she got the addition of some additional female colleagues on the bench. It was very clear that she took great joy and energy from the fact that she wasn't alone on the bench as the only woman after Justice O'Connor retired. She often talked about the fact that she had two loves in her life, her husband, Marty, and the law. And after Marty died, she was left with the law. And I think that the reality of the courts changing when she had the colleagues of Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan on the court, it felt like she had more energy. It felt from watching the arguments that she was more engaged. And obviously, several times over the course of her time on the court, she faced cancer. She was treated for different cancers, and until last year hadn't missed a day on the bench because of them. And I think that her continued ability to sort of both be a mentor, but also be a leader of the court, regardless of her gender, was sort of a great sign of both the success that she reached in life, but also the legacy that she left to the court and to judges and justices on both the Supreme Court and lower benches.
Thanks. I want to turn now to sort of what this means for the future of the court. Since the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh in late 2018, the court has been firmly under Republican control, and Justice Ginsburg's death and the potential of President Trump and the Republicans confirming someone before the election would shift the court even further to the right. There is a little wrinkle, right? We are 6 weeks roughly until the next election. And for those who are unfamiliar, this has come up before. This is the second consecutive presidential election in which we have a monumental Supreme Court vacancy with just a very short time to go before that election. So when Justice Scalia died in February 2016, Mitch McConnell said that the Senate would not confirm any other nominee until after the election, explaining that the American people should have a chance to have a say in the selection of their next justice. The 2012 presidential victory of President Obama, for some reason, did not count. Today, so that was about 8.5 months before the presidential election. Today, we are fewer than 2, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has already released a statement saying President Trump's nominee will receive a vote on the floor of the United States Senate. What do we think, folks? Is Majority Leader McConnell going to wait until after the election to, is he going to abide by his own rule here?
I mean, he's not going to abide by his own rule unless there are 4 Republican senators who are going to stop him. His statement tonight is basically the equivalent of thoughts and prayers for Justice Ginsburg, and President Trump's nominee, whoever it may be, will get a vote. Capturing the Supreme Court has been the most important agenda on their item. This was why he held open the, seat caused by Justice Scalia's passing for 237 days. And they want this, appointment. If, they had their own justice in place of Justice Ginsburg this past term, just think about all of the cases that would have come out differently. The president's rescission of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program would have been upheld. The Louisiana admitting privileges requirement that would have closed 2 of 3 abortion clinics in the state would have been upheld. So too would have, I mean, the president's tax return cases may very well have come out the other way, given that Joan Biskupic's initial reporting said that the case initially came out 5-4, with the Chief Justice voting with the more liberal justices to allow the subpoenas of the president's tax returns, and the 4 conservative justices voting the other way. So if Justice Ginsburg had not been on the court, and instead there would have been another one of President Trump's nominees, we may very well have seen a Supreme Court rule that the president is above the law. These are the stakes, and it is deeply unfortunate that in the year 2020, we cannot take a moment to grieve the loss of such a powerful icon as Justice Ginsburg, because this is the state of our politics, and these are the stakes of this appointment.
Yeah, I do think it's really telling that it was difficult in the moments after learning of her death to think about the loss of this justice who's been on the court for decades, because the political stakes of it were so immediately obvious and overwhelming. To your point, like, there's just no time to think about it. I do want to elaborate that since McConnell laid down his rule and did not consider the nomination of DC Circuit Judge Merrick Garland, there's been a little bit of backfilling of justification for that rule, primarily from conservative scholars who have said that that rule applies when the president and the Senate are controlled by opposite parties. It is in that case that the Senate will not consider a Supreme Court nominee. So now, with the White House and the Senate under Republican control, they would say that the rule does not apply. How credible you find that is, that's your own journey, I guess. Professor Murray, I want to turn to you. Who are some of the folks who President Trump has already said he'll nominate somebody? Who are some of the folks who we could see floated for this, and who do you think is likely to be selected?
Well, let me say, by way of sort of floating some names, I don't think it's exactly the case that we do not consider Justice Ginsburg's legacy as we assess the political landscape in which her seat will be filled. As Leah says, Justice Ginsburg's legacy for women's rights, for voting rights, for civil rights more generally, is on the line. And the person who occupies this seat going forward will either be the linchpin that turns all of this backwards, or the person that propels this further. And so when we talk about her legacy, it is about the political calculation of filling this seat. And I think that's exactly why you have Leader McConnell moving so quickly and decisively to set out his terms for this. I think going forward, the people who I think my eye is on going forward is Amy Coney Barrett of the Seventh Circuit. I think there will be a lot of pressure to fill this seat with a woman. She's perhaps the one at the top of the president's list, perhaps Allison Larson from the Sixth Circuit, or alternatively Naomi Rao of the DC Circuit. But Amy Coney Barrett has a really compelling personal story. She's a stalwart Catholic. She took a lot of hits from Dianne Feinstein in her own confirmation to the Seventh Circuit. There would be a kind of interesting conservative redemption story if she were to be installed on the Supreme Court. And to Leah's point about the 4 senators who would need to stand firm for the rule of law in order to beat this back, I think, again, Susan Collins, who's in a very tight Senate contest in Maine, this might be an opportunity for her to really beat back the challenge from Sarah Gideon and stand firm and maybe redeem herself after her vote on Brett Kavanaugh's nomination in 2018.
Chris, what are some other Senate races that we could see affected by this? I know that, depending on which prognosticator you're looking towards, there are potential flips or toss-ups in Arizona, North Carolina, Mark Kelly and Tom Tillis, respectively, Cory Gardner in Colorado, and maybe to a little bit lesser extent, Joni Ernst in Iowa. How do you see this news and the forthcoming fight over it affecting those races?
Yeah, I think that it will certainly be an issue that's used to try to drive turnout in those races. But I feel like a lot of the potential, other than Senator Collins, the other senators that we're looking at as potentially even being willing to consider holding the line. Obviously, Senator Murkowski has already said that she would not go forward with the nomination before the election. And so there is this question about whether or not they hold it for the lame duck, and which raises another whole issue. But then the other senators, the possibility of what is Mitt Romney going to do, I'm not even sure who else we could like realistically hope for the fourth vote. But it's going to be tough, and it's going to be sort of I'm sure organizations are already planning and are going to be out. This is sort of like put things on hyperdrive, and I think the real question is going to be traditionally judicial selection has been something that Republicans have gotten amped up about, but not Democrats. But we have seen recent polling over the past 2 weeks that Democrats are actually more amped up about judicial selection this time than Republicans. And this could put that into hyperdrive and really lay down the marker for Democrats who maybe haven't been so convinced that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are the people who they really want to vote for president. And this could have just made it an election that they care about. So I think that every race will be affected by it. And I think the questions about turnout in Senate races, in swing presidential states might quickly become an issue as well.
Thanks. I'd like to talk a little bit about the process too. Traditionally, there is a lengthy, weeks-long, sometimes months-long vetting process for Supreme Court nominees. Nominees pay visits to many senators, particularly those who might be on the fence. There will be a very accelerated timeline if Majority Leader McConnell wants to consider somebody before the election, or even in the lame duck session, in the event that President Trump were to lose and he were to be replaced in early January. Professors, how do you see the logistical aspects of this playing out? What's going to be different about this attempted nomination confirmation that we haven't seen previously?
I mean, it's going to be the same thing that we've seen with this administration and this Senate's treatment of all federal courts and vacancies. They don't care about the rules. F the process, they just want the power. And that is what is going to happen here. I mean, the president just this past week, or maybe it was the week before, released an additional 20 names for a possible Supreme Court appointment. This is clearly something that his administration has been thinking about and that they have been wanting to happen for the last 4 years. So they clearly have a list of names in mind. I wouldn't be surprised if they name one quickly. And again, if there are not 4 senators who are willing to 4 Republican senators who are willing to stand up to Mitch McConnell, then we're going to see that person confirmed before the election. You know, Mitch McConnell has control over Senate rules of procedure, and he has modified those rules of procedure to reduce the amount of debate that is required for nominees, to change the number of votes that is required to confirm Supreme Court nominees. And there's just no reason to think he's not going to do the same thing here, continue to modify procedures and run roughshod over Senate processes in order to confirm a justice of the president's liking. You know, on her deathbed, Justice Ginsburg dictated a statement to her granddaughter that said, "It is my dying fervent wish that I do not want to be replaced until there is a new president." And the reason she said that is because she well understands that whoever this president is going to put up is going to run roughshod over her legacy, just as Melissa said.
I also don't think you can disregard just the circumstances we're in because of the pandemic. I mean, typically these courtesy visits between the nominee and the senators take place in person. I think Zoom is very likely to be the medium for this. That'll be a first. It's going to be really hard, I think, for some of these senators who are going to be on the hot seat, like Susan Collins, to be able to say, I looked into her eyes and, I saw a good soul. I mean, like, no, you looked into a Zoom camera and we don't know what you saw. So coronavirus will certainly dictate some of this. The pace of this, again, as Leah said, is going to be really rapid fire. And again, I think that bodes well for someone like Amy Coney Barrett, who was vetted before for the Kavanaugh seat. It also perhaps plays well for people like Amal Thapor from the Sixth Circuit, who is also vetted, Ray Kethledge from the Sixth Circuit, Thomas Hardiman, who have been past considerees for these positions. I think they're going to have to move very quickly. And so we may see a rehashing of names that had previously been surfaced and found wanting for whatever reason.
Sort of open it up to the floor now. I think conventional wisdom says that in 2016, the Supreme Court vacancy really sort of galvanized the Republican Party, and particularly voters who were unsure as to whether or not they wanted to support President Trump. Putting on our speculation hats, do we see something happening like that with the Democrat Party? Do we predict something like that happening?
It's impossible to know. I don't think Democratic senators and Democratic politicians or the Democratic National Convention did themselves any favors when they did not put the courts on the agenda when they ran the convention. And, they ran a bunch of ads about, Joe Biden's role in the Violence Against Women Act, neglecting to mention that the Supreme Court had invalidated a key provision of the Violence Against Women Act. And so they have not yet learned to talk to their constituents about how courts are essential for achieving key pieces of the democratic agenda: civil rights, voting rights, and equal citizenship. And perhaps they can learn to do so quickly. Perhaps people will learn that on their own. But it is essential that people go out to vote. But I think there is a real concern that in addition to a Supreme Court appointment that will turn back the clock on so many areas of law for decades to come, this could also lead to a second Trump presidency, a second Trump term with a Republican Senate. And that is, just very difficult to think about.
So I may be a little bit more optimistic than Leah is. I think the fact that Joe Biden has already stated that he would put a Black woman on the court is something that has really galvanized minority communities. Black women are already excited about this election, I think, because of Kamala Harris. And I think they were excited before because of the prospect of seeing themselves reflected on the Supreme Court. So I think that's something that will continue to build. And I think minority communities recognize that they had in Justice Ginsburg, certainly on questions of voting rights, affirmative action, women's rights, they had a stalwart champion there. I also want to point, it's a very different election than the one we saw in 2016. In 2016, I think everyone underplayed the threat of a possible Trump victory. I mean, he was sort of laughed off. And I think for that reason, everyone thought that Merrick Garland and the stolen seat would be redeemed once Hillary Clinton was installed as president. I don't think anyone thinks that they have any money on who's going to win this election. Everyone knows that this is all going to come down to turnout on both sides. So I think it's very different for that reason as well.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that and just where we're at as a country now. I mean, we don't just have the pandemic. We've also had a summer of uprisings against police violence. We've also had these questions about how schools are acting, how parents are even dealing with the education of their children. And so, and every day we have something else come out about the way that Trump is mishandling or not even caring about the pandemic, in favor of only caring about his election. And so, I mean, I think it's clear that what they're going to do over the coming days and tonight, I mean, that they're I told Jay before the show, that I do not bet that there is not a possibility that Amy Coney Barrett is on a flight to DC right now. I mean, if you look at the way that Trump has handled a pandemic, if he's willing to politicize that for his election, there is no doubt in my mind that he will do whatever he thinks he can do to amp up a base that might not otherwise be turning out for him. And I think that in this case, his and Mitch McConnell's interests are wholly aligned. And so I do agree with Leah that I mean, McConnell will do whatever, the rules will be whatever McConnell wants them to be to move this forward. And it really is going to be up to Democrats and people who care about the rule of law in the middle of the country to really make it clear to senators that this is just an unacceptable way to go, or it is going to happen on whatever timeline Mitch McConnell wants.
I want to ask one more question about the politics in Washington, which is that if you're a Democratic senator right now, what is your best chance at stopping this from happening? Don't everyone offer one at once, though.
I mean, I think it has to be like, it has to be finding what those Republicans are who might have concerns, and really being willing to put either private pressure on them, or when it comes to it, public pressure. I think outside groups are going to be starting to put public pressure on those senators immediately. And I think that for the Democrats in the Senate, it really is going to be about, like, is this fair? Is this process, are we even able to go through a process in a way that allows proper vetting of a candidate by the Senate? And if they can make it, and they will have to make it very clear that it is not happening that way if Mitch McConnell goes forward too quickly, and put their colleagues in the difficult position of needing to, like, say that moderate Democratic Senator X is being irrational when they say that this dramatically sped up process is, like, too fast. Melissa, I think you had.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, when I talk about people being ginned up about this election, I mean, they need to actually bring their voices to this process even before they get to the ballot box. I mean, if you were excited to go vote because you thought Joe Biden was going to put a Black woman on the court, then you should be excited to get out there and make your voice heard about not stealing this particular seat, actually letting the process play out as it did in 2016, and letting whoever is elected on November 3rd actually make this call.
I know we're getting to the bottom of the hour here. I'd love to give you the last word, Leah.
It is possibly worse than you think it is.
Well, I don't love ending a show like that, but I also don't know how to draw any other conclusion right now. This is not a Republican Senate that has given us reason to think that they will show integrity in this case, and it is going to fall to Senate Democrats, but to a much larger extent to voters, to make their voices heard, to whichever of their senators are representing them in Washington, to let them know that this is something they'll be watching closely. That's going to do it for the briefing this evening. I want to thank everybody for tuning into this emergency show. Have a good weekend and rest.